Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're not just passively observing human behavior, we're going to treat it as evidence in a deep, psychological investigation. We're deconstructing a personality type that doesn't announce itself with a megaphone, but instead operates quietly, completely in the shadows of our relationships, our workplaces, and our families.
Right off the bat, we've got to confront a truly terrifying question. What happens when the absolutely most dangerous person in the room is actually the one playing the victim? Today, we're looking beneath the surface of the covert narcissist. This is someone who hides right in plain sight, weaponizing vulnerability and literally leveraging your own empathy against you. We're going to dig into the hidden emotional drivers, the unconscious motivations, and yes, the actual neuroscience behind this pathology.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the illusion of humility, where we're going to deconstruct the mask.
So, when you hear the word narcissist, what pops into your head? Probably the loud, overtly arrogant extrovert demanding the spotlight, right? But the covert narcissist fits a completely different behavioral profile. They seem introverted. They might even act shy or self-deprecating. But please do not mistake this for humility. It is a highly calculated strategy designed for the exact same goal: being the center of your universe.
Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. On the outside, they project this tragic backstory, the deeply misunderstood victim who is just constantly wronged by the world. But beneath that false humility is a massively suppressed grandiosity. They harbor this deep, hidden entitlement, fundamentally believing they are uniquely special, and they foster this intense, simmering resentment whenever the world fails to recognize their hidden genius. There's this brilliant quote by Paramahansa Yogananda: "Some people try to be tall by cutting off the heads of others." And honestly, that hits the nail on the head here. Covert narcissists almost never attack you directly. Instead, they rely on covert antagonism. We're talking about passive aggression, deliberate sabotage, conveniently forgetting commitments, or making these really subtle, sarcastic digs disguised as just jokes. They systematically shrink you down just to manage their own incredibly fragile self-esteem.
Moving on to Section 2, the hidden machinery. Let's look at the biological and emotional roots of all this.
Listen, we're not just talking about someone having a toxic attitude or a tough week. We're dealing with a clinical constellation known as the vulnerable dark triad. This is a dangerous combination of vulnerable narcissism, secondary psychopathy, and borderline personality traits, which means their behavior isn't random. It's highly structured, highly predictable, and deeply rooted in a clinical pathology. It's a severe distortion of how a human being actually relates to others.
So where does this actually come from? Well, the origins often start with childhood neglect mixed with conditional praise. This creates a core of agonizing, deep-rooted shame. They learn early on that their true self is unlovable, so they become entirely reliant on external validation, what psychologists call narcissistic supply. And this isn't just a psychological quirk, it's neurological. Research actually reveals structural differences in their default mode network. That's the area of the brain related to self-processing and empathy. Their brains physically process their sense of self and the relationship to you differently than a neurotypical brain.
The end result? They develop a completely false external persona to mask this agonizing core of inadequacy, shame, and total powerlessness. Their entire existence is essentially a high-stakes performance. They are constantly on the run from the terrifying reality of their own perceived worthlessness. They absolutely require you to believe their illusion, because if you don't, they're forced to face that unbearable core.
Which brings us to Section 3, the narcissistic collapse. What happens when the mask finally slips?
Imagine their primary source of validation just completely dries up or is directly threatened. What happens? They experience a narcissistic collapse. This is a total behavioral unraveling. Without your emotional attunement holding up their self-image, the terrifying interior world they've so carefully hidden just floods their reality. That undefended, shame-filled core becomes entirely visible, and it is completely destabilizing, not just for them, but for anyone unfortunate enough to be witnessing it.
And let me tell you, this unraveling is anything but quiet. The symptoms are intense. We're talking extreme emotional helplessness, this escalating victimhood, and just catastrophic fear. They might retreat into a severe state of paranoia and hypervigilance, or suddenly burst into completely uncharacteristic rage. They'll even start spinning these bizarre, delusional narratives to rewrite reality, all to protect their ego from the unbearable truth of their failure.
But here is the absolute deepest psychological truth about the collapse. While their distress is totally real, they really are in pain, Structurally, this is a relational recruitment mechanism. It functions specifically to pull you, the target, right back into a caretaking role, usually just as you were finally establishing boundaries. They use their total psychological breakdown like a magnetic force to bind you back to them, forcing you to resume acting as their emotional regulator.
Now let's look at Section 4, the surveillance switch, and their desperate quest for control. If you've ever experienced this, you'll recognize this terrifying switch in their behavior. Pre-collapse, they controlled you through avoidant behavior, right? The silent treatment, passive-aggressive stonewalling, always making you chase them. But post-collapse, once they lose that control, they abruptly shift to compulsive surveillance. Suddenly, it's late-night emails, burner phone calls, stalking your social media, and orchestrating these accidental run-ins. They go from a quiet, passive-aggressive avoid straight into a state of desperate, obsessive surveillance.
Please, whatever you do, do not mistake this frantic rush of attention for genuine affection. It's not about love, it's definitely not about closure, and it is not them finally waking up and realizing your worth. It is a sadistic compulsion to reclaim narrative control. It is strictly 100% about reestablishing emotional dominance over you. If you mistake this post-collapse surveillance for love, you are going to be pulled right back into the cycle.
Okay, Section 5, the psychological defense. Let's talk tactical execution. How do you actually survive this?
You know, a lot of psychologists recommend the gray rock method, which is becoming completely unresponsive and boring. But with a covert narcissist, going totally blank can actually trigger severe retaliation, or it gives them the perfect narrative fuel to play the victim again and tell everyone that you are abusing them. This is exactly why the yellow rock method is a much safer alternative. Yellow rocking combines emotional neutrality with strict professional courtesy. You remain polite and civil, but you offer absolutely zero emotional depth.
So how do you actually yellow rock? Think of this like a tactical briefing. Step 1, maintain a calm, polite neutrality. Step 2, keep your responses brief, factual, and entirely predictable. Basically treat them like a distant business acquaintance. Step 3, utterly ignore all provocations, all baiting, and all the dramatic sob stories. And Step 4, keep every single conversation locked purely on the present. Refuse to get dragged into rewriting the past. By doing this, you are systematically stripping the narcissist of the intense emotional reactions they so desperately crave. The absolutely crucial takeaway from our entire investigation today is this: you must disengage from their emotional economy. You cannot heal them, you cannot love them into suddenly developing empathy. You survive by simply refusing to participate in their delusion, effectively starving the pathology of the relational fuel it literally requires to keep its illusions alive. At the end of the day, your boundaries are your ultimate weapon. We've really lifted the veil today on the neuroscience, the deep-seated childhood trauma, the agonizing shame, and the calculated manipulation that drives the covert narcissist. Once you see the absolute psychological truth beneath the surface, that illusion is shattered forever. So I'll leave you with this. Now that you know the dark machinery hiding right beneath their mask, will you ever look at the victim the exact same way again? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive in today's Explainer. Stay curious, stay extremely observant, and most importantly, protect your peace.